So as I said, I work for Medair. You've been amazingly generous partners with us for a number of years now, and so first of all, thank you. As has been mentioned before, what Medair does, where we fit in the big picture as a humanitarian agency. So humanitarian work is about the life-saving stuff that happens in an emergency. Development work is the stuff when things are stable and you can build something sustainable. So what Medair does is the life-saving stuff at the beginning of the story. But where we specialize is we're a mid-sized NGO, which means we're able to be quite agile, and where larger NGOs are able to bring large truckloads of food and aid to urban areas and cater for 80% of the people. What Medair does is we say, where are the 20% who can't get here? And so we go to some of the most obscure, out of the way, difficult to reach places to make sure that people don't get missed. And one other NGO said of Medair, when the road stops, Medair keeps going. And I think that's a really good description of us. During the Afghan earthquake last year, our team drove for 2 days and then hiked for 2 days into the mountains to get to villages that had been really impacted by the earthquake but didn't have any other support there. So that kind of tells a little bit about where we fit in. This is our impact report from 24. And you can see we helped 3,753,021 people. We work in health, in nutrition, sanitation, and hygiene. Now, 2 weeks ago, we got our figures for 25. Now, last year, the world experienced something horrendous in terms of massive aid cuts, huge cuts to aid internationally. The Lancet in June published some figures estimating that 14 million people would die over the next 5 years who wouldn't otherwise have died because of the aid cuts. In February, they revised those figures, and they now think 22 million people are going to die because of the aid cuts who wouldn't otherwise. That's half the population of England. That's a third of the population of the UK. That's terrifying. So in Medair, we experienced a 25% cut in our funding. And here's the amazing miracle. Our impact for 2025, we saw a 3% drop in the impact that we had in terms of the number of people we were able to help. Now, I think that's nothing short of miraculous. I don't know how that was able to happen. That is absolutely God's provision. But in the last year, we have been able to reach 3% fewer, or help 3% fewer than we did the year before, which is amazing. We want to be able to help a lot more, obviously. So right now in the news, it's quieting down a little bit over the last couple of weeks, but Lebanon's been a big thing in the news. And Medair has worked in Lebanon since 2012. We have worked with Syrian refugees in Lebanon. There was up to 1.5 million Syrian refugees in the country. It has the highest proportion of refugees of any country in the world, Lebanon. And that's what we're doing. And then obviously a couple of months ago, the world's changed, and our team had to pivot from working with refugees to a full-on crisis and emergency. And what we've seen in that country is 1.2 million people displaced, more than 8,000 casualties, and the figures earlier this week, I mean, it's changing all the time, but the figures earlier this week were 2,500 people killed, and more than 111,000 people finding shelter in collective shelters. So these would be old schools or community centres, and things like this. And so our team of around 70 people in Lebanon had to very quickly pivot to working with that. And so currently, Medair is, we've been involved from day one. We're working with 56,000 people in 234 shelters. So it's about a third of the people who are in the shelters. But our team, a lot of our local team live in areas that have been bombed. And actually, a lot of our local team members are experiencing the same things as the people they're helping. They're displaced as well. They've lost their homes. They've lost everything. So it's incredible the sort of courage that's been shown by them in carrying on in working there. But I just thought I'd give you a little bit of a brief update on what's happening in Lebanon, because it is quite topical right now. So we just heard Luke 7. I'm going to read the story again in a moment. It's a very familiar story. There are lots of things you can bring out from it. The first time I preached on this passage, it was at a church, and I was told a couple of days before that the youth were all going to be in for it, and was that okay? So what I've done is I've slightly changed the wording of it just to make it more suitable for children. You may not even notice, but we'll read it anyway. So one of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house, and he took his place at the table. And a woman in the city, who was an estate agent, having learned that he was eating in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster jar of ointment. She stood behind him at his feet, weeping, and began to bathe his feet with her tears and to dry them with her hair. Then she continued kissing his feet and anointing them with ointment. Now, when the Pharisees who invited him saw this, he said, so if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what kind of woman who is touching him. She is an estate agent. Jesus spoke up. Jesus spoke up and said to him, Simon, I have something to say to you. Teacher, he replied, speak. A certain creditor has 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they couldn't pay, he cancelled the debts for both of them. Which one of them will love him more? Simon answered, I suppose the one for whom he cancelled the greater debt. And Jesus said to him, you've judged correctly. Now, like I said, there's lots to bring out of this. The cost of the perfume, the grace of God, the forgiveness of God. But I just want to bring something to you that you might have missed, okay? So this is in Deuteronomy. We'll go back a few pages in the Bible. Deuteronomy. The people of Israel are on the verge of moving into the promised land. And most scholars would tell you that Deuteronomy is essentially, it's the constitution for the nation of Israel. It's the founding sort of document for them. And one of the things that you see right through it is a thread of justice. It contains, there's the 3 different tithes in the Old Testament. One of them in Deuteronomy, every 3rd year to be given for the widows and the orphans and the immigrants and the poor among them. It's the first time in history that any tax was taken for the poor. It's nothing ever like that has been done before. And it goes right through this governing document. And one of the things particularly to notice is in Deuteronomy 15, it said, there should be no poor among you. For the Lord your God will greatly bless you in the land he is giving you and as a special possession. There shouldn't be anyone in need among you. We were doing our devotion at work last week, and we were talking about Luke 4:18 and 19, and it's the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he's anointed me to bring good news to the poor. And I looked up that word, and the word for poor, it literally means those who are cowering. Those who are cowering. We'll come back to that. So enshrined in the Constitution of Israel is the idea that there should be no one of need in the middle, among their people. There shouldn't be anyone in need because God's given them all they need. Now, Jesus is at the house of the religious leaders of Israel, whose job it is, among other things, to make sure there are no needy among them. So, what is going on with this woman? Because no one grows up wanting to be an estate agent. She didn't go to a careers advice thing at school and say, I want to sell houses for the rest of my life. Nobody does that. She didn't do that. There's only one possible reason why this woman is an estate agent. And that is because there was nothing else left for her. Maybe she was married. Maybe she was divorced. Quite likely, a woman had no power to divorce anyone. Maybe her husband had died. In either case, she is left utterly destitute. Without anything. She probably had children. So she's faced with a choice of either I sell houses or me and my children starve. But there should be no needy among you. These people that Jesus is eating with are the people whose job it is to make sure no one is in such a desperate state they want to sell houses. So when he tells the story about who has the biggest debt, I think he's making a very pointed remark. Because I wonder, who has the biggest debt? The one who's doing the one thing left that they can do to stop them and their children starving, or the ones who had the responsibility to make sure she was never in that position in the first place? I will leave that for you to go and ponder who had the biggest debt there. But that's the situation, that this woman had no other option. It's desperation. But whatever happened to her, whatever left her in that place, wasn't her choice. So let me tell you a story. This is Kabatcha and 10-month-old Jok Jok. Kabatcha lives in South Sudan. Her daughter, she walked for 7 kilometers to bring her daughter to one of our Medair clinics because she was so severely malnourished, acutely severely malnourished, which means that when a child reaches the point of acute severe malnutrition, they can't digest ordinary food. We have to give them a special formula. And when they're at that stage, they're vulnerable to everything. Even a cold could kill them. Absolutely, really desperate situation to be in. She brought Jok Jok to us, and we were able to treat her. This isn't the start of the story, though. So let me tell you a bit more about the story. So this is South Sudan. It's the newest country in the world, I think, still. It's only existed for a couple of decades. It split away from Sudan. And there's a part of South Sudan called Leah County. Now, there was a lot of conflict in South Sudan, but in 2015, our team visited Leah County to do an assessment on how we could help them with water and sanitation, particularly. It was a relatively stable part of the country, and we said, well, what can we do to help them to make sure there's not disease outbreaks and things like this? And so our team went and did an assessment, and they came away saying these people are incredibly advanced in what they're doing. They've shown enormous ingenuity. They have been really creative in what they've done. They've come up with loads of really sustainable practices. And our team came away saying, we can't do anything to help them. They don't actually need our help. They're thriving. That was the word used. They were thriving. So that's 2015. In 2016, this man, the president, Salva Kiir, who was part of the Dinka tribe, had one of his vice presidents, Riek Machar, who was the vice president. He was part of the Nuer tribe. And the president, the tribes historically have been enemies, and the president particularly did not like this guy and decided he was going to set about trying to destroy everything about him. Machar comes from Leah County. So what the president did was he sent the army in, and there was a horrific genocide. Horrific war crimes, just awful. And people fled, and they fled to these islands in the middle of the swamp. The swamps are infested with crocodiles and snakes and goodness knows what else. And it was difficult for the army. They couldn't get their vehicles through the swamps, and so it was a relative sanctuary for the people to live on these small islands, and this is what it looks like here. So they're surrounded by swamps, the mosquitoes, the dangerous animals, all of this kind of stuff. But it's a sanctuary for them. But it obviously means they're completely cut off from assistance. There's no medical stuff going in there. There's no food. And so Medair, we started trying to help people, and so we would fly in with these helicopters. They're not our helicopters because we don't have any planes. They belong to the UN. They fly us in, just to clarify. Medair doesn't have any planes. And I talked to one of the team who did it, and it was an incredibly dangerous thing to fly in with a helicopter because the army were in that area. And there were two problems. One, when you flew over an area with a plane, people came out to see and then became targets for the army. And the other thing was that it took about 20 minutes for them to move the guns around so that they could shoot the helicopters down. So they were saying they had 20 minutes. They would fly in, land. They had 20 minutes to offload everything, teach them everything they needed to do, and get back out there before they were vulnerable to being shot down. And one of the team said, people literally kissed their families goodbye before they got on the helicopter to do that, because they didn't know if they were coming back. And this was a horrendous situation. And in the end, what Medair decided to do was to try to get to these islands by canoe. Now, it's safer in that you're not obvious, but if they were spotted, they were sitting ducks. But they chose to take that risk. And it was a 17-hour canoe ride over 2 days to get to these islands in Lear to help the people. But they could spend more time with them, they could help them. Whatever it took, the team's view was whatever it takes to get nutrition and medicine and food to these people, we've got to do it. And here we are several years on. People are still living on these islands in the swamp, still at war. The area is still very volatile. There is a huge amount of violence and brokenness. But it's not through any fault of their own. Kabacha didn't make any choice in her life that led her to here. All of the decisions were made for her. And here is someone who is utterly desperate, whose child is going to die if they don't get help. And she will walk, and many, many, many like her, through swamps that are infested with crocodiles and snakes in order to get the medical assistance they can to try desperately to save the life of their child. It wasn't her choice. She had nothing to do with anything that's gone on that led to this. It was wealthy, powerful men who did this. Because no one grows up wanting to be an estate agent. She didn't grow up wanting to be in a desperate situation like this. And so this is a story of her and her child, Jok, her daughter, and how Medair was able to help them and others like them. But part of this big picture that's left them in that state. And so, again, I want to thank you that you are partnering with us in what we do. That you are helping us to help people like that to get out from that hole so they're not left with no other option. I heard this quote recently from Jamila Mahmood, who is at the International Council of Voluntary Agencies. She said, humanitarianism is not charity. It is the organized refusal to accept that where you are born should determine whether you live or die. And that's what we do. Because there should be no poor among us. There shouldn't be people cowering and desperate. Because God has given us enough for everyone. And so this is why we do what we're doing. This is why Medair, when the road stops, Medair keeps going. Because every life is worth going the extra mile. Because every single one of these men, women, and children is the image of God. In every face that we look at, we see the face of Jesus. So again, thank you so much for what you do. Because I believe we're in a moment in history, and I said this, I think, last year, where where we, the body of Christ, need to stand up in a way that we haven't done in a very long time. And you are already doing that. I was a church leader for 30 years before doing this. It is really painful. I, I'm personally, I'm not arms dealing to Sudan, but I do think you're right, and what I'm trying to say to you, you have a fair point. What I'm trying to say to you is this is a situation we're working in there. We are trying, we are doing what we can to save lives there alongside other agencies. So the end of the story is that Kabacha and her daughter is okay now, and many like her. But this is the situation that's led to them being in that place. Now, I can't, and Medair can't do anything about what's led to them being the wars that have happened then. You're absolutely right. I totally agree with you. We and this church, and the way you partner with us, is helping us and our peer organizations to change the narrative for those people. But the sad reality is that they are in this situation. And so, as I think, as I said to you, I think this is a time for us as a church across the West to stand up and make a difference. As a church leader, I heard Esther misquoted more times than I could ever tell you. It was usually along the lines of revival's coming, God's put you here for just such a time as this. But actually, Esther 4, what it says is, if you will not stand up and save these people, someone else will, but it'll be the worse for you, because God has put you here for just such a time as this. So I feel like if we're going to wheel Esther out, now's the time to do it. Now's the time to do it. When the 22, I said it again last year, I did the math. It takes $40 a year for every Christian in the West to make up the difference in aid that's been lost. $40 a year. We don't have to sell our houses and cars. I mean, if you want to, you can, but it's not an unattainable thing for the church in the West, in this country, in the US, in Australia, to change this narrative now. We can do something because we were here for just such a time as this.